Hey everyone, and welcome back to Amplify Agile. I'm Kiara Zapanta, and today's episode is our second installment to our capacity planning series, a series dedicated to diving into a different aspect of capacity planning for each episode. Today, we are going to discuss labor and headcount demand forecasting and actuals. And today I have the pleasure of introducing Niels Visser, portfolio management consultant with threon, who is here to join me to discuss this topic and share his valuable insights for all of you. So Niels, it's so great to have you here today. If you can just give a quick introduction of yourself and your background.
Okay, yeah, well, my name is Niels Visser. I'm a senior portfolio management at threon, which is a consultancy firm specialized in agile implementations and portfolio management. Next to that, I'm also the team lead for the Dutch branch of threon. I've been involved in agile since 2013 and in different roles. Now I'm also involved in implementing target process in one of my customers. So that's how we met. Huh?
Oh, awesome. It's so great having you here today. So now let's dive into today's topic. If you can just share a brief explanation of what demand for headcount is and why it's important for an organization and for portfolio managers.
Yeah, well, headcount is, of course, the capacity that we want to utilize to use to realize the strategy of the organization and to create the value. That's why we populate teams and agile trains or tribes, and we have them work on the strategy realization. But of course, we want to know how much we spent on it. What do we spend on realizing what goal? So that's why we need to have an overview of who is in which team and what have they been working on. So that's basically the importance of having the headcount available.
Perfect. Okay, got it. So as today's organizations increase initiatives throughout their portfolios that leverage agile delivery, what challenges does that create for portfolio managers and finance teams in regards to effectively forecasting and also defending demand for headcount? And what challenges are teams seeing today, and where do you think they stem from?
Well, for starters, the big challenge of organizations is to make the switch from funding projects to funding stable teams. That is a big change in the way of working that organizations have to get used to. Once they've made that switch, of course, everything becomes a little more simpler because you have those stable teams and you have to make them pull the work to their teams, to their backlogs, and start working on it. That's, in my opinion, a big challenge for organizations to make that switch from funding specific projects to funding stable teams. And of course, also to show to the rest of the stakeholders that it actually works. That there is productivity of improvements on the products and thus realization of the strategy. So the feedback loop from the work to the money spent, that's also important, and it's a big challenge for most organizations to get those measurements right to implement those OKRs.
Got it. Okay. And in addition to those challenges that you mentioned, what challenges do organizations commonly face when trying to actually scale their agile teams or their enterprise agile practices in terms of headcount? And how can organizations combat the challenges that they foresee or encounter?
Yeah. Scaling implies that you have a big company. Otherwise, you don't need scaling. So agile enterprises that need scaling, and they tend to have more complex products and more teams are working together on that product. So they will need to cooperate, they will need to coordinate their work, and they have dependencies. And this asks for coordination that you would normally not need in a small company. And this coordination is not easy. It requires a standard way of working. It requires integration moments and alignment mechanisms from strategy to the user stories that the teams are working on. And yeah, that is difficult. And those teams, they need to be able to work together to be effective, even when they are not in the same location or time zone. So yeah, how can you combat it? In my opinion, this requires a tool that facilitates this coordination of multiple teams working on a product and having access to all the information that lives in the organization.
Perfect. I like that you mentioned a tool, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper later on. But just to move on to my next question. So in an ideal world, portfolio managers, product teams, and finance teams could develop and rely on a shared view of forecasted demand, also make hard decisions about priorities and timelines, and even shape demand. Can you walk us through how an organization could achieve that ideal state? Any best practice that you can share or lessons learned that we should avoid?
Yeah. It's a really hard question to begin with, but I've had multiple consultancy assignments where just a part of the organization, mostly the IT part of the organization, starts to work with the agile way of working. It's usually one or two or three IT teams that start with Scrum or Kanban or XP, and then the agile virus spreads, and more teams join in, and they basically develop their own way of working in those teams. And at that moment in time, that's not a problem. So they configure their Jira or their Azure DevOps the way they want it and what works for them. But then, yeah, if you want to scale those agile practices, then you will start to need that coordination that I mentioned before. And at that moment, you will get pushbacks from those front runner teams. And at that moment, I've experienced it multiple times, so I might call it the best practice. You really need support from the senior managers in the organization. So you really need power to implement that one agile way of working in the complete organization, and to get everything working and to make those teams really work together on a complex product. So yeah, usually Agile starts bottom up, but at some point in time, you have to make it top down as well. And for that, you really need the senior managers behind you. So yeah, that is a best practice that I really wanted to let you know.
Got it. How would you say people can get senior management on board?
I think basically you have to show them the data on projects and how successful they were if you want to go agile, because you only go agile when it's good for the company. So it is an improvement. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't propose to do it. So yeah, usually there are a lot of failed projects in the organization, and by going agile, you can reduce the risk of failing to realize your strategy. So that should be the message to senior management. And next to that, there's really a war on talent going on. It's not easy to hire good developers. So you really need to create a setting in organizations for those developers that they can really thrive and grow. And that is more successful in agile organizations than in more traditional waterfall settings. Mm-hmm. So the chances of you being able to hire more IT talent will be bigger once you go agile. I've experienced that myself at some organizations. So yeah, that should be a reason as well.
Got it. So you mentioned the data and showing the data to senior management. Would you say that this is what ends up driving the need for modern portfolio management and enterprise agile planning tools like target process?
Yes, within large organizations, that is typically a common pattern. Yeah. You see that some parts of the organization start with agile, it spreads, it becomes the standard way of working. You get senior management on board, and yeah, then you get the scaling issues. So you need coordination, and therefore you need, in most circumstances, a tool to facilitate that.
Awesome. Yeah. Got it. Okay, so now moving on to the next topic of labor capitalization. Can you just give a brief explanation of what it is and why it's important to finance and portfolio teams?
Yeah. Well, capitalization, it doesn't have to do anything with agile, but it's still important. But it's an accounting method in which a cost is included in the value of an asset, and then it is expense over the useful lifetime of that asset, rather than being expensed in the period that the cost was originally incurred. So the cost of the labor that was spent on realizing an asset like software can be capitalized, and thus spreading the cost over the economical lifespan of that software. So being able to capitalize the cost of developing a software tool, it is important for the finance teams, because by doing so, it reduces the costs in total of developing that asset, that software. So it will make it easier for an organization to actually develop that software product. So yeah, that makes it important for the organization, which includes the finance teams and the portfolio managers, because it affects how they prioritize certain goals to be reached.
Okay, got it. And as teams start scaling agile labor for delivery, does that create challenges for finance teams? And are there any risks we should be thoughtful of?
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges. The big challenge is to get the data to actually being able to calculate those costs. Therefore you need administration. Therefore, it needs to be administered which user stories have been delivered for which product, and whether that label is indeed eligible for capitalization. You need to have access to that data, and that data should be of quality that also your external accountant will accept. Roughly, you can say that all work to build new functionality can be capitalized, but for instance, the work you do for user support is not to be capitalized. So you need to add metadata on those work items. those user stories or features or epics, or whatever way you do it. But yeah, you need to know what that story was for. Yeah, tooling can help you to facilitate by collecting that data and managing the data quality.
Perfect. And can you describe in deeper detail the potential impacts of labor capitalization on products that rely on at least at some degree in agile delivery? And can it affect TCO or even major decisions organizations make for future investments?
Yeah, well, for this topic, it doesn't really matter whether the delivery is agile or not, but it does matter for TCO. So the impact of capitalization is that it eases the pain of a big investment on the yearly budgets, and it enlarges the value of the company because you create assets. And budgets, they become more stable since the costs are spread over the economical lifespan of the product. And yeah, basically investors, shareholders, they like this. And yeah, also in time of inflation, it would indeed lower the total cost of ownership. It might make investment decisions and getting shareholder buy-in more easier. But yeah, on the downside, if the asset becomes obsolete because it proved not to work for the market, then you have to take the costs at once and write them off. So yeah, there's a big upside, but there's also a risk or a downside.
Got it. Okay. And typically, what team or department would be implementing labor capitalization? Would that be business leaders, finance, team level?
Well, capitalization itself is definitely a finance process. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they need the help of the delivery organization to get the data. What I've said before, of classifying work to be capitalized or not. So yeah, in most delivery or in most agile delivery organizations, there is a team like portfolio management or a way of working team, and usually teams like that, they also in a functional way own the tooling, so finance needs to discuss with them what kind of data they need, and yeah, that should be implemented in the tooling and in the delivery processes. So capitalization, it is a finance process, but they need portfolio management for it, to make it work.
Perfect. Okay. So what are some of the common pitfalls or misconceptions to watch out for when implementing capacity planning and capitalizing labor?
Yeah. I think there is a balancing act between striving for 100% correct data and the administrative burden for the teams. Because if you want 100% correct data, then you might force teams in a situation where the capitalization becomes more important than delivering the excellent product, and that's not good. So then they would have to split up the registration of the work, the definition of their user stories, for instance, and they would have to do it towards capitalization and not to facilitate teamwork or customer value and the cooperation on that. So going for 100% correct data quality is perhaps not going to work. So if you can convince the finance team and the external accountant to settle for 80% correct data, then that will probably work a lot better.
Got it. Okay. And lastly, what impact does a modern portfolio management and enterprise agile planning tool like Target Process is it useful for capitalization of labor?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, it's basically not possible without a tool like that. Tools such as Target Process facilitate the collection of the data that is needed for capitalization, but they also take care of the required traceability from the work done to the total accrued costs of systems like target process, they also log what people are doing in the system, and that type of data is basically a prerequisite for capitalization. Furthermore, a tool can facilitate in making all the work done by the teams transparent without accurate roll-ups from the teams level and without a single source of truth. This process would remain based on a lot of manual effort and basically stay a guesstimate instead of a measurement.
Got it. So a tool is very important to actually implementing both of these practices. So thanks so much, Niels. It's so great to have you on today. And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks everyone for tuning in to Amplify Agile. And a huge thank you again to Niels for sharing his insights on labor and headcount, demand forecasting and actuals. So today we learned that effective coordination and alignment of teams, senior management involvement, and cultural mindset shifts are vital for success within these practices. Niels, again, it was so great having you on the show and looking forward to having you back in the future. And everyone else, we hope you all found today's episode informative and insightful. And please feel free to leave any questions in the comment section and stay tuned for our next episode.